Thanks, Sue. Good morning, everybody. Very, very pleased to be here. I think this is my third speaking event at a marine conference within 12 months. So if that's a precursor of what's to come, I'm certainly going to take a lot of encouragement from it. But it's also the day after we've closed the second offer that we've done for Atlantis, which means we've now raised the best part of £10 million for them. And I also hope that's going to be a precursor to many, many more millions to come. Maybe not immediately, but equally we are in live discussions on another prospect right now, and we've seen definitely an increase in the things that are coming through the doors. So I'm taking a lot of confidence from that. The collaboration message, if you didn't quite catch that, I absolutely encourage you to do that, because we've seen that that is a very good way to bring investment into the sector, whether it's crowdfunding or elsewhere. But onto the topic of crowdfunding and how to use it, what I thought I would start with first of all is a little bit of terminology. Crowdfunding is now a phrase or a word that's been used a lot, abused a lot, and actually it's quite difficult. It's a good idea actually that I just say, here is how I'm using it, so we all know what we're talking about. For those of you who were at the new quarterly event, then this is a refresher for you. I also stuck in a few new facts just to keep it interesting. But to start with, donation and reward is probably the one that in some ways has been best known, but that is not a regulated activity. That would be, I want to climb a mountain, or I want to fund the manufacturing run of my new widget. Those are both unregulated. It's probably better to think about those as crowdsourcing. Crowdfunding is really for investment, and for the most part, that's a regulated activity. If you do energy shares or just share offerings, those aren't necessarily. I'm going to focus on the regulated aspect of it, because that's what we do. In terms of the different types, the main ones to date, or where all of the volume has been in debt-based, loans, which is commonly known as peer-to-peer, and securities, which is what we do. And overall now in the UK, that's 14 billion cumulatively, and there is another billion of equity on top of that. With 5.3 billion, sorry, that should be 2017, so that just shows you the growth, and I'll come back to that in some more detail. I'm going to give you a potted history as well, but probably the main event, if you like, in terms of putting crowdfunding, peer-to-peer investing into the mainstream of investments is ISA eligibility, and that happened in 2016 for loans or debt-based investments. To put that in context, there is currently at any given time somewhere between 400 and 450 billion pounds invested in individual savings allowances in the wrappers, and every year there's about 80 billion that goes into that. So we've just had a tax year close. There'll be somewhere in the order of 70 to 80 billion probably that's gone into that. Most of it goes into cash, which is a declining asset. So actually, from a sector's perspective, there is a really big opportunity to go out and increase the numbers, and that is what's happening. So your potted history, if you're at a loss for what to talk about at dinner tonight. 2005 is actually when the sector really started with Zopa. Zopa did consumer lending. They were on their own for quite a long time. Then with the financial crisis, obviously we were all completely pissed off with investment industry and banks and so on. And we thought they were looking after us, and then we worked out they didn't really know what they were doing. And then that saw the introduction of a lot more platforms come along. Funding Circle was the first of the big players, and it is one of the 3 big ones now in the UK. And that was when we first put in our application. Actually, we didn't put it in, we put it in 2010, but our application to the FSA, as it was at the time, and became the first regulated platform, because originally peer-to-peer lending loans, although it was not regulated, so it was you got a consumer credit license. And in 2014, actually largely because the industry was agitating for it, all of those platforms, all of the loans platforms said, we want to be regulated too, because actually it's going to hold back our growth. If we want to speak to the 80% of the 80 billion of cash that's going into an ISA, we probably need to be regulated. So that happened in 2014, a kind of pivotal moment for the sector. And then the next pivotal one, which I've already mentioned, was ISA eligibility in 2016. And then in 2017, the sector passed its 10 billion cumulatively, and actually then rolled all the way up to the 14 billion cumulatively, with 1 billion of it on top from an equity perspective. And this graph, which is not maybe, oh no, it's actually not too bad, that sets out year by year how that growth has happened. and gives an estimate. These are alt-fi numbers, and the graph is just loans and debt, is estimating maybe that's 7.5 billion. I think that target's probably realistic because a lot of the big platforms, although they had ISA eligibility, they weren't opening that up to new customers. It was only available to existing customers, and that is now beginning to change. So I think it's entirely possible that we'll see that growth accelerate from here. I guess one other interesting fact is that top 5 platforms are 85% of the volume. So in some ways, it's beginning to look a little bit like the big players in the banks. But there are lots and lots of other platforms that are coming along doing all sorts of different things. And that's also what's very relevant for this room. So crowdfunding in the marine sector, I think my main message on this is that there's nothing different, if you like, in terms of a consideration around are you going to look for crowdfunding and what type versus any other type of, or any other sources of capital. So if my pink line is kind of a very crude summary of what stage are you at within your business, you know, technology, are you in development or optimization? I think most of the room in here is probably at development, but at a certain point, and hopefully quite soon, you'll start transitioning to optimization. And then from a revenue perspective, are you pre-revenue? Are you on that, that pivotal moment of having a stream of revenues, or actually have you got multiple lines? And obviously, the further along that pink line you are, then the much wider the kind of sources of capital that you can speak to and you can go after. So within the crowdfunding options, in terms of funding types, grants, obviously, this sector has been principally in the grant world so far. Hopefully, we're going to move quickly from there. And then depending, again, where you are on that pink line, begins to open up more options. There are quite a lot of equity crowdfunding platforms. Some of the best known would be Seedrs and Crowdcube, possibly also Syndicate Room. And they would be for an early stage business which has equity type of risk. Certainly, I would say several of the companies in this room may be close to being relevant for that audience. It's absolutely accepted that it's very high risk. You can't get very far on those platforms without going through, well, first of all, you have to do a test. And if you come out of that test without understanding that the majority of startups fail, you probably slept through the test. So that's just in terms of, you know, people being very aware about the risk profile. Then as you're moving on, you get into kind of project finance and working capital debt. I'm going to come on to what we look at, but it's principally the latter two. What does it bring you at the end of the day? It's access to repeat capital, whether it's staying with one platform or moving, you know, as you grow up, moving across different platforms, and it gets you public support. So in the Atlantis, the 2 offers that we've done, we had 1,300 in the first offer, 1,500 in the second offer. There was an overlap of 600 or so. So that's 2,000 new people invested in the sector with a vested interest in it succeeding. And we had an issue with a project recently, nothing of their making to do with Ofgem. And when we updated investors on that, several of them replied, almost everybody was supportive, and several of them replied saying, what would you like us to do? Should we write to our MP? So I don't think that should be underestimated. So just a little bit about Abundance. What do? We're about long-term relationships. We're about becoming a kind of funding partner for businesses that want to grow, and then we will grow with them, and our customers get more interesting investments that deliver returns to them. We've done 30 projects for a total, or launched for a total of about 75 million, anywhere from 1 year, shorter term, higher risk, to 25-year, and we've even been talking up projects for a longer maturity than that. And we've got 5,000 active investors now, and that number keeps growing all the time, doing an average of about £14,000 across 5 different projects. And our core proposition is what we call win-win. So we are all about saying to people that you should be able to invest in things that marry with your personal priorities, ethics, objectives, whatever word you choose to use, without compromising on a commercial return. So it's absolutely about putting a commercial proposition in front of people, pricing the risk appropriately. That's a very long discussion for another day, what that actually means, but then also allowing people to feel like the pound that they invest has gone towards something that they feel good about. And that, I'm just going to move quickly to that Atlantis one. You know, what we were delighted, we have been absolutely delighted to help Atlantis raise this capital, really pleased to see how well it went. We've done 2 raises, both of £5 million, over 5 years, 8% with a parent company guarantee, to do various different things, pay down some debt, advance different projects in their portfolio, and to fund working capital. The first one got £5 million in 3 weeks, all over the UK, 1,300 investors. The second one has been after their announcement of the tie-up with Cymac Energy. There's actually quite a lot going in. So we gave a much longer timetable to allow people to digest all of that, but we've raised now almost 5 million in just about 11 weeks. So, like I say, really pleased to be able to do that, really pleased to see the level of interest, which we kind of knew was there, but the proof comes in the pudding when people put their money into it. Tidal and marine energy is something that is very much in favour with the general public. You probably all know that, but that translates into a willingness to invest and a willingness then to take the time to understand your sector and support you in more ways than just money. Thank you.